This is Mark's Gospel, chapter 6. I'll begin in verse 14. And King Herod heard of him, Jesus, for his name was spread abroad. And he said that John the Baptist was risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. Others said that it is Elijah, and others said that it is a prophet, or as one of the prophets. But when Herod heard thereof, he said, It is John, whom I beheaded. He is risen from the dead. For Herod himself had sent forth and laid hold upon John and bound him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife, for he had married her. For John had said unto Herod, It is not lawful for thee to have thy brother's wife. Therefore Herodias had a quarrel against him and would have killed him. But she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just man and unholy, and observed him. And when he heard him, he did many things, and heard him gladly. And when a convenient day was come, that Herod on his birthday made a supper to his lords, high captains, and chief estates of Galilee. And when the daughter of the said Herodias came in and danced and pleased Herod and them that sat with him, the king said unto the damsel, Ask of me whatsoever thou wilt, and I will give it thee. And he sware unto her, Whatsoever thou shalt ask of me, I will give it thee unto the half of my kingdom. And she went forth and said unto her mother, What shall I ask? And she said, The head of John the Baptist. And she came in straightway with haste unto the king, and asked, saying, I will that thou give me by and by in a charger the head of John the Baptist. And the king was exceedingly sorry, yet for his oath's sake, and for their sakes which sat with him, he would not reject her. And immediately the king sent an executioner, and commanded his head to be brought. And he went and beheaded him in the prison, and brought his head in a charger, and gave it to the damsel. And the damsel gave it to her mother. And when his disciples heard of it, they came and took up his corpse and laid it in a tomb. The Bible is very interesting, don't you think? I find that the Game of Thrones, I don't know how many of you have ever watched that. I haven't seen much of it, but I don't think it has anything on the stories of the Bible and the history of the people in it. I asked for some prayer Wednesday night from the church about this because I was primarily a student of history in school, and I did not want this lesson to simply be a history lesson. Even so, there is some history here that I'm going to touch on a bit. I could go on for a very long time about this history. We're not going to do that, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Herodian dynasty in Israel at that time. It is the story of the bloodiest and most brutal royal family ever to rule over the Jews. The terrible old king, Herod the Great, the same one who plotted the death of the infant Jesus when the Magi came from the east. You remember they were guided by a star. They came to Jerusalem, turned the whole town upside down, asking, Where is he who is born King of the Jews? And my goodness, the wise men of Jerusalem said, well, he's got to be in Bethlehem if he's around. And Herod sent them out, and the wise men learned in a dream not to go back to Herod. They departed back east another way, and Herod was kind of angry about this and decided to kill all of the smallest children of Bethlehem in order to prevent there being any king of the Jews other than him or whoever he would name. That's just the kind of guy he was. He died a horrible death. The death you could easily say was the kind of death that somebody accursed of God would die. It's recorded in the Antiquities of Josephus. I love saying that. The Antiquities of the Jews by Josephus. It is recorded how he died. He came to be called Herod the Great because of primarily all of his magnificent building projects that included the temple. He came to power as the Hasmonean dynasty collapsed. They had ruled Jerusalem for more than a century. With the help of Rome, Herod secured power. He had seen Julius Caesar and Mark Antony and Cleopatra come and go, and his grip on power was strong and complete until the day this most wicked of men finally died. Because not even the most evil and ruthless of kings can live forever. Josephus records that Herod grew very ill when he became old, and said that he despaired of recovering, for he was about the 70th year of his age. He grew fierce and indulged the bitterest anger upon all occasions, the cause whereof was this, that he thought himself despised. And he was right about that. He was utterly despised as well as being greatly feared. He had brought in a lot of foreign practices. His family came from Idumea. He killed many good men. He corrupted the high priesthood. He claimed himself better than the rulers before him because he had raised up this great temple, and he expected to be remembered in glory forever because of it. We know something of Herod's final condition in somewhat horrifying detail. I'll spare you a little of it, but over time he grew worse and worse. His insides were burning him constantly. Certain parts of his body became just hideously putrefied. He had an ulcerated colon, there was terrible bloating, and he retained so much fluid it threatened to burst his feet. He had to lie down on a couch at all times, even when addressing an assembly, because he couldn't breathe if he sat up. When he breathed, his breath was a horrible stench that no one could bear. His body was often contorted with severe spasms. He lived for many long, dreadful months in this worsening condition, and he took it out on everyone. Josephus writes, it brought him to do all things like a madman, and though he were near his death, he contrived the following wicked designs. He commanded that all the principal men of the entire Jewish nation, wheresoever they lived, should be called to him. Accordingly, they were a great number that came, because the whole nation was called, and all men heard of this call, and death was the penalty for refusing. The king was in a wild rage against them all, the innocent as well as those that had afforded ground for accusations. And when they were come, he ordered them all to be shut up in the hippodrome. I shall die in a little time, so great are my pains, which death ought to be welcomed. But what principally troubles me is this, that I shall die without being lamented, and without such mourning as men usually expect as a king's death. So Herod commanded that there would be a great period of mourning at his funeral, such as never had any king before him. He decided that the whole nation would mourn from their very soul. He desired that as soon as they saw that he was dead, they would place soldiers around the hippodrome and shoot everyone inside with arrows and cast spears and stones, so that they would all die, and that he would have the honorable of a memorable period of mourning following his death. He furthermore gave orders that one out of every family should be slain. His son Antipater was in jail. At the time, he begged the jailer to release him, promised him great reward. Let me go so that I can stop this. The jailer instead told the dying king. And so Herod ordered Antipater executed. That was his third son that he ordered put to death. He changed his will once again, divided up his kingdom. He made Antipas the tetrarch of Galilee and Perea, and this is the Herod that we talk about in these scriptures. His brother Philip was now given lesser territories in this will, and 5 days later, Herod the Great died. His most trusted relatives, in order to save their own lives, had promised to slay all the finest men of the land who were sitting there in the hippodrome, but instead they released the captives as soon as the horrid old man died. He died the gruesome death of the accursed. A grandson of his died almost the same way, Herod Agrippa. Nearly all of the Jews of the land rejoiced when Herod died. His son Philip's wife, Herodias, was not happy about the situation. She immediately saw that her status would be improved if she married Philip's brother Antipas instead. So Herodias, who had been engaged as a child bride to Herod Philip. This happened when her father was executed for attempting to poison Herod the Great. Lots of executions of family members in those days in that bloodline. She was related to the Hasmonean princes and princesses before that, and so the man that married her had a certain legitimacy to the throne. There was reasons why all of this was going on. She and her husband survived Herod the Great because during the madness of these last years, she and Philip lived in Rome as private citizens. Philip's mother had been the daughter of a high priest. She knew that her husband, Herod Antipater IV, was involved in a plot to poison the dying King Herod. And so for that reason, even though Philip and Herodias weren't involved, he disinherited him from the throne. And so for that reason, Herodias had no more use for Philip. He was just going to rule some of those outer territories. So she set her eyes upon his brother. Herod Antipas divorced his first wife, Phasaelis. She was the daughter of King Aretas of Nabatea, which is one of the regions from where the Herods came. She wanted to marry Herod. She wanted to marry Herod Philip, his brother's wife Herodias. He wanted to do that. So he divorced Phasaelis. I don't want to get too confused here, and I don't want to confuse you. Philip divorced Herodias because there was just too much going on, and then he died. His death was mysterious. He was hiking in the Arabian desert. Supposedly he died of heat exhaustion. Nobody knows what happened to his body. These are the kind of people we're talking about who were in power in Judea at the time. Eventually in Rome, the emperor ratified Herod's will. After some turmoil, he settled the nation of Judea under the rule of Herod's surviving sons and then a series of Roman governors. Philip and Herodias had a daughter. History records her name as Salome. Her name was not mentioned in the Bible, but we know an awful lot about her. Soon after the death of John the Baptist, young Salome, she was a teenage girl at the time. She was married off to Philip II, another son of Herod, the tetrarch of Trachonitis. He died soon after childless. Another royal death. It's a lot of deaths surrounding Salome and her mother and all of these people. She married someone else, another great-grandchild of Herod the Great, and she was queen over Trachonitis. She had 3 sons. She had coins minted with her face on it. That was a no-no for the Jews. You didn't have graven images. This was not a good Jewish girl. For what it's worth, they named asteroid 562 after her back in 1905. I don't know if that means anything to you or not. It doesn't mean a thing to me, except that Salome's name has been known for many, many years. She's been the subject of many plays, of many pieces of art, sculpture, and paintings, plays, musicals. Despite all of that, she would have been virtually unknown to history if she had not demanded the head of John the Baptist for her wicked mother. This was in part due, as the scriptures tell us, to the fact that John the Baptist preached against the incestuous marriage to Herodias. She was Herod Antipas's step-brother's wife, half-brother's wife. She was also his niece on another way. They were all related in all kinds of ways. So this was an incestuous relationship, either way you look at it. Philip was not dead. The marriage was against the laws of Moses, but these two had met one time in Rome, where so many of the children and the grandchildren of Herod the Great were raised so that they would be loyal to the emperor. And it was another reason why the Jews mostly despised all of the Herods, because they were agents of the Roman Empire. When Herod Antipas divorced his first wife so that he could marry Herodias, his first wife's father, the king of Nabatea, was furious. There was actually a war that went on. It's not recorded in the Bible. It happened a few years after these events. And in that war, Herod lost. A few years after the dance of Salome, those kings went to war. He lost that. And a few years after that, his nephew, Herod Agrippa, who was a friend of the emperor Caligula, who came along later, accused him of treason. And so Herod Antipas of the Bible and Herodias, his wife, were exiled to a backwoods town among the barbarians in a Roman colony in Gaul, modern-day France, far away from power, far away from the life they knew. And as far as we know, they died of old age there where they could hurt no one else. Herod Antipas was a superstitious man. He was afraid that Jesus might be the resurrected John the Baptist. He was haunted by what he had done, at least at first. He had feared to leave John the Baptist at liberty to preach, because in part he preached against his adultery, his incest. He feared to execute him because he knew that John the Baptist was holy. He recalled the horrifying death of his accursed father, Herod the Great. He didn't want to die like that. I often hear of the American principle of a wall of separation between church and state. It means that preachers should never speak concerning political matters. No, it doesn't. That's what we're told. What it really means is, well, it's safer that way. If from the pulpit we did not speak truth to power, we'd be pretty safe. And those preachers who never do that are all right. They don't ever have any problems. They usually have big salaries, and they retire rich. I agree with the founders that the government should not establish a national religion. I do not agree that this is a gag to silence the pulpits. If John the Baptist were willing to tell the people when their rulers were in sin, should not preachers today do the same? If they do, they should realize they are risking trouble from those very same rulers and their followers. If John the Baptist didn't escape trouble, we might not expect to either. In the 21st century, post-Christian, after Christian days of Western civilization, the people of the countries formerly known as Christendom, you know that, back in the days of Roosevelt and Churchill, not so long ago, we called the nations of Europe, and adding America and Canada in, Christendom, because all of these nations were Christian nations. Well, now, in the nations of Christianity, we barely, if at all, govern ourselves the way we used to a couple of generations ago. The people, I'm not addressing the rulers at the moment, I'm talking about the people, generation by generation, are becoming more and more ungovernable. We are losing self-control. Self-control is a fruit of the Spirit of God. And if we don't have that, we don't have self-control. We're easily triggered. because we can't control ourselves. And we react to everything around us. We're not responding thoughtfully or prayerfully. We're reacting instead of responding. For that reason, we now have a ruling class, because we're not governing ourselves. We're letting others do it because we can't. We have a ruling class. We call them that now. You see it in some of the news media and in some of the political commentary. A ruling class. How could we have a ruling class where it's supposed to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people? How could we have a ruling class of people in America? Well, we do. If you haven't heard them call it the ruling class, they're also called the donor class, the ones who give the money that keep it going. The political class, you may have heard them called that. They live in the capital cities, in the highest income neighborhoods in the world. They live by lobbying, bribing, corrupting, entangling elected officials in an incestuous cartel of speculative banking, currency and stock manipulation, sweetheart deals, insider trading, judicial and bureaucratic tyranny, and ever greater control over the necessities of life for the nations they now rule. The more things change, the more they stay the same. There is nothing new under the sun, Solomon told us, and he was right. Christians living in the first century had it worse than us, but they saw a lot of the same things we're seeing now. It has become the aim of the rulers of our day, as it was in the days of John the Baptist and Jesus, to erase history from the minds of successive generations. They don't want you remembering what was really said, what was really done. They want you to remember what they tell you was said and done. They want to erase all history of Judeo-Christian civilization now from the minds of successive generations. They want to destroy all influences of Christianity in our society in this generation. The courage of John the Baptist, the assurance of Christ, is needed. It's needed by pastors, it's needed by preachers, it's needed by teachers, it's needed by every disciple of Jesus in this present moment, as much as it ever was. I told you about some bad old days. Well, these are bad old days too. It's always been bad old days. But sometimes it can get worse. Truth, righteousness, a higher authority than men. Those are three things that a ruling class cannot abide. Those are three things, especially at the summit, they dare not allow to flourish. God, holiness, truth, they are impermissible to tyrants. Whether it's some little tyrant at City Hall or some big tyrant in the highest posts of the nation. Those who would rule rather than serve dare not allow people to trust in God. They cannot allow the standards of righteous morality to be applied to themselves. And if they allow it to be applied to anyone, it can be applied to them as well. And so the standards must fall. The bathroom doors must open. The truth about what they do must remain unheard at all costs. Those who are in authority, those who are given over to wickedness in authority, are spiritually compelled to do things so that their position, so that their power can be grasped and held at all costs. Herod Antipas did not want John the Baptist killed. In his youth and in his earlier years, he kind of wanted to be a decent fella. He didn't want to end up the way his father did. He listened to the preaching of John the Baptist. He thought that a lot of it was very good. He did a lot of the things that John the Baptist said to do. But his wife was throwing a fit. In order to prevent John the Baptist from getting killed by the agents of Herodias, he put him in prison where he would be safe. He wound up killing him anyway. There are people who, and you will see it, people who are in positions of power, in positions of government, and they're decent people. They're pretty good people, as far as people go. They don't want to do all the things that are being done. They don't want to comply with these things, but it's out of their control. They have to if they're going to stay where they are. They can't buck the system. They can't rock the boat. You're with them or you're against them, and they have decided to be with them. Herod Antipas could have chosen not to behead John the Baptist. He said, yeah, I made you a promise, but I didn't promise to do evil. Instead, he went along with it and did the evil. I saw the other day that at LSU, there were some, Louisiana State University, there were some protesters who decided that they wanted to make a big deal out of trampling and burning an American flag. Well, they got more than they bargained for at LSU. That might work at Berkeley. That didn't happen quite that way at LSU. Before they knew it, they were surrounded by those patriotic young folk in Louisiana. They were driven out to the edge of a field. You had police officers all around them, even mounted officers trying to keep the crowds back as these people were determined to do what they wanted to do. Those officers didn't want to be against that crowd. Those officers probably wanted to join in, but they had to stop that crowd from stopping that protest. They had to. They didn't have a choice in that matter. Well, finally, one of them did execute a choice. He grabbed up the ringleader and said, "We're getting you out of here. We're getting you out of here for your safety." I mean, there was some young guy in uniform there, in fatigues, just shouting at him, "My brothers died for you. My brothers died for you." People don't understand the passions that are arising in this nation from what I call the traditional, the patriotic, the Christian people. We don't want to hurt anybody. But folk are getting righteously angry at what is happening to our nation. And so many who are swept up in the halls of power feel like they can't do anything about it. The Christian in the 21st century who now dares to speak out is in the same position as the Christian of the first century. If we declare the truth to one another, if we stand for righteousness, if we cling to the Holy Bible, if we speak the gospel of Jesus Christ, we may find ourselves the targets of godless rulers who defend their hold on power by neutralizing or eliminating all whom they oppose. It has been said that power corrupts, and that absolute power corrupts absolutely. Herod Antipas had great power, and he became greatly corrupted. As I mentioned, he at first welcomed the sermons of John the Baptist. His adultery led him to an unwise and dangerous divorce with war and loss to follow. His lust and debauchery resulted in his murder of the greatest prophet in the history of God's chosen people. His fatalistic plunge into despair after he abandoned the faith of his fathers, enabled him to plot and abet the execution of the Son of God. Herod later on wanted to murder Jesus. Jesus said, "You tell that sly fox, I still have a ways to go. Tell him that I'm doing miracles out here, and that 3 days after my death, I'll be perfected." When Jesus was finally in the power of Herod, Herod mocked him, put a robe on him, sent him back to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. He had Jesus in his power. He could have done something at the time, except he couldn't. He was bound up with the spirits that he had given himself over to. And at that time, one gets the feeling that he was drunk or something. He was mocking Jesus, put a robe on him, and sent him back away. Prophecy had to be fulfilled. The manner of Jesus' death was prophesied. It had to be done by the Romans. They were the ones doing executions of that kind, crucifixions, lifting him up on a tree. It had to be done by the Romans. Herod had no power. And that is something that we have to remember as well. All of those people who seem to be in power, all of those people who seem to be having their way, aren't really. God is going to work out everything, all things, for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purposes. We are serving the King of Kings. We are serving the Lord of Lords. We've got a job to do, and we're not finished yet. We've been told that we're going to take the gospel to the uttermost parts of the world, that we are going to make disciples in all nations. We'll be baptizing in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost until we baptize that last person, until that last person is converted to Christianity. I'd love to be there when it happens. Last Sunday, we had a gentleman in the back of the auditorium at the service. He was dressed extremely well. He spoke with a thick East African accent. He said he was a Nigerian missionary. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, Nigeria is having to send missionaries to the United States now. I fear that time is not very far. But what I do know is that we've got a job to do. Just as Jesus had a job to do. Jesus finished his job. John the Baptist finished his job. And whatever may happen to us, we're going to finish our job as well.